my name is Victoria Tippins. I have been attending births for 15 years as a doula and a student midwife. And over this time, I created the Peaceful Birth Method, which is a 5-step process to support parents in feeling confident and prepared for birth. So you will learn 5 of the best physical preparation tools to support having a smoother birth. And this works no matter what trimester you're in. If you're in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, if you're about to have your baby any day, it doesn't matter. These are, in my opinion, some of the best 5 things that you can do to prepare your body. Let's begin by talking about positioning in your pelvis and why physical preparation matters. So physical preparation matters because at the end of pregnancy, your pelvis starts to soften. So the pelvis is supposed to access mobility at the end of pregnancy, opening a little bit at the top. This is the inlet, which is where the baby goes in, opening a little bit in the middle. So you can do different things to open the middle of the pelvis. This is the mid pelvis, and also opening at the outlet where the baby goes out. So it's this last circle where the baby goes out. So we have the inlet going in, the mid pelvis in the middle, and then the outlet where the baby goes out. We want all of those areas of opening in your pelvis to be able to access their full range of mobility. This can be limited if there's any kind of tension in that musculature, if there are ligaments or tendons that are holding tension, that are keeping the bones and the muscles from being able to access all the space, the full range of motion. And there are many different ways that this can appear. So physical preparation is not just about we're going to do a few things to help prepare your body for birth and to help stretch or whatever. It's really about understanding your nervous system, understanding your body movement patterns, your tension holding patterns, and resolving those. And this is why personalized coaching can be so supportive. So today I'm going to teach you just a general 5 great things for everyone to do. In my coaching program, that is where we can personalize what's going on with your body and how we can address that in your body specifically. Because you could totally be doing all the right things and still have a lot of tension on the right side of your pelvic floor and never really figure that out. Or maybe you know about that, but you don't know how to resolve it. And then that may cause your baby to come down into the pelvis and be like, I don't really have a lot of space in this part of the pelvic floor. I guess I have to kind of tilt my head. And then maybe baby's head is tilted to the side, and that could lead to a longer, harder labor and even increase the risk for a C-section. So understanding your tension holding patterns is really, really important when it comes to optimizing positioning. So when it comes to supporting optimizing space and optimizing your baby's position, it's really about releasing tension. A lot of moms at the end of pregnancy are super freaked out about their baby being in a position that maybe isn't super ideal, or they've heard from their provider oh, your baby isn't in the best position, and maybe that freaks them out a little bit. So it's not about freaking out and trying to force your baby into getting into the right position. It's about trusting your baby and creating space in your pelvis for your baby to do what your baby is meant to do. Because your baby knows what to do. They know how to get through the pelvis, and your baby is very, very wise. They're not just like a passive member, like a passenger, right? Going through birth, going into the pelvis and out of it just through contractions. Your baby's job is 100% essential in having a vaginal birth, because they don't just go in and out. They actually go through a series of movements. They're called the 7 cardinal movements of labor. So basically, your baby will tuck their chin first. Babies can sometimes want to extend their head. So this is the first step in why it's important to do this kind of physical preparation. And I teach a specific formula of what to do in early labor for my coaching program moms to help get your baby to tuck their chin. Because every once in a while, a baby might not want to, and that can make labor a little harder. But baby should tuck their chin, and then they're going to descend and engage into the pelvis. And after they're in the pelvis, they just go down, down, down all throughout active labor. When they get a little further along in labor and you get close to pushing, your baby will do something called the internal rotation. So that means that your baby is facing the side, and then they're going to rotate probably to face the back. Every once in a while, a baby will rotate to face the front. And that can happen too. Babies facing the back is called anterior. Babies facing the front is called posterior. So your baby is descending, and then they do the internal rotation, and now you're ready to push. So now we're pushing, 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 and baby comes down, 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 and maybe they start to crown, and then the head comes out. Now the baby has to turn again, because the shoulders can't come out through the pelvis. If you can imagine, if my hands are the pelvic bones, the baby can't come straight past because the shoulders are going to hit on those pelvic bones. So instead, the baby has to do another turn. So the baby turns to the side, and this is very cool. They will do it on their own, and we don't have to tell them what to do or how to do it. They're just going to do it. It's very, very cool. So the baby's head comes out, and then the head will just turn like that. And now the shoulders can come out. And so if you can imagine, if this is the top shoulder, now the baby's top shoulder can come out under the pubic bone, and then the bottom shoulder, which is underneath the tailbone back here, can come out like that, if that makes sense. So when baby's straight on, it doesn't really work, but if baby turns, now the top shoulder can come out, the bottom shoulder can come out after that. This is why many providers, after the baby's head comes out and turns, they'll take their hands and put it on the baby's head, and then they pull to guide the baby's head and shoulder, or not the head, to guide the shoulders out from underneath the pubic bone. This is not necessary most of the time. If you were to, you could peruse the Peaceful Birth Method Instagram page. You can look at Badass Mother Birther and look at some videos like no one's there, but unassisted, like hands off, right? Like no one is pulling on the baby. You'll see the baby's head comes out, they turn, and then they come out the rest of the way. So we don't need someone to pull our baby out or to do these things for the baby to navigate the pelvis, because most of the time the baby will do that. There are rare circumstances where someone might need to step in. We can reduce the risk of a positioning issue causing someone to need to step in during pushing by moving frequently throughout pushing. So let's talk a little bit about your baby's position at the end of pregnancy. So at the end of pregnancy, your baby will do something called dropping, and that means your baby descends into your pelvis. So the baby will tuck their chin, and then they're going to just drop into the pelvis like this. Floating above the pelvis here is -3 station. When your baby's head reaches the inside of your pelvis, so it descends down to about here. If you can imagine, like where you're sitting right now, if you wiggle back and forth, you feel these bones under your booty. Those are your sits bones, the ischial tuberosities, and they kind of stick out here. So once your baby's head has reached down to about that place where they meet the ischial tuberosities, your baby is at 0 station. Then your baby will turn, and then they'll start to come out, and when they're about at crowning, that is at +3 station. So your baby will descend probably -2, -1 before going into labor. Like if you were to get a cervical exam, maybe upon admission or at the end of pregnancy when baby's really low, and they say baby's like -1, that's great. That means like baby's like quite low. -2, sometimes babies can be even -3, sometimes they're not very engaged, but most of the time when baby starts to engage, you'll be at a -2, -1, and that's something that's kind of cool. You can learn from a cervical exam. So baby's position here matters, because sometimes babies can engage facing one way or facing the other way, and that can identify a likelihood of how baby's going to orient themselves through the rest of through the rest of labor and through birth. And there are certain things we can do to help adjust if it seems like baby is kind of leaning towards one side or focusing on one side or the other. First, before I go into like the intricacies of that, I want to say that your pelvis is perfect. There's this idea that if your baby is posterior, facing forward like this, that means that your pelvis might be favoring a posterior baby. And maybe that means your birth is going to be harder or longer, or you have an increased risk for tearing. It is true that babies facing forward or posterior sometimes can make labor a little bit harder, a little bit longer, and can increase the risk for tearing. And not too long ago, I attended a 2-hour birth where the baby was born posterior and she had no pain in her back and no tearing. So babies know how to get through the pelvis, and it's important that we trust that. We have a lot of influence, but we don't have control. And it is true that some pelvic orientations can support or encourage babies to align in a certain position, like facing forward, but it mostly has to do with musculature and tension. Because if you have tension on one side of your pelvic floor, your baby, like I mentioned before, might enter and then feel all that tension on that side and then compensate by tilting their head to the side. Or maybe your baby enters the pelvis and wants to do the internal rotation where they turn to the back. And they try to turn back, but there's all this tension and congestion in the back part of the pelvis. And so they try to turn, but they can't turn because your sacrum is maybe like kind of pulled in because of tension. So then they go, well, guess I have to go the other way. And then they try to be born posterior. Right? So sometimes babies come out posterior or start to engage in the pelvis in a posterior orientation because of tension in the pelvis. Other times, babies engage in a posterior position or turn that way because that's just the perfect position for the baby to be in. And we can't know. But what we want to do is everything we can to add that influence, right? To support flexibility and release of tension in an ongoing capacity, support your nervous system because your nervous system is directly connected to your musculature so that your baby has all the space they need to make the best choice for them. There is this idea that there are 4 pelvic types: gynecoid, platypoid, android, and anthropoid. I don't know who named those. It sounds very alien, but basically, if you have one of the 3, it's called gynecoid. It's like the best pelvis for birth, apparently. There's another one that like maybe would be okay, but it probably will favor a posterior baby and maybe your birth will be hard. That's kind of the idea, right? And then the other 2 aren't really compatible for birth. This is it was created in the era of eugenics to give care providers an excuse to sterilize women of color. It's horrible. An evidence-based birth said that we should only be teaching the 4 pelvic types in medical school as an example of racism in medicine. But before I knew this, as a student midwife many years ago, when I started that journey, my textbooks would teach me about the 4 pelvic types. Yeah, so there are research shows that actually there is variation in every pelvis. Pelvises don't really appear in 4 specific types, but there are variations to it. So if anyone says, I think your pelvis isn't adequate for birth just by seeing you or doing a pelvic exam, that's not evidence-based. And I've seen big babies, like 11-pound babies, come out of tiny people. And I've seen larger people, larger bodied people who appear to have a wider pelvis, have a really small baby, like a 6-pound baby, and have a lot of challenges during birth. So it doesn't really, some of it has to do with musculature, but most of it really truly has to do with your nervous system and has to do with tension. To summarize, what I invite you all to do is do the right things that can add that influence to support your baby in having the optimal space to be able to navigate the pelvis well, and then let it go and trust your baby, because we can't have control ultimately. And there's no point at the end of pregnancy to be told, maybe your midwife or OB palpates your belly and they go, oh, your baby is probably posterior, which they can usually tell if they feel the limbs in the front. Maybe your birth is going to be hard. Don't let that spell be cast upon you, because like it's very easy at the end of pregnancy for a baby to be like, I'm starting to kind of think about engaging. I'm kind of facing a little forward and now I'm ready for birth. I'm just going to turn. It's as simple as turning. If a baby decides I don't want to be posterior anymore, they just have to turn. And your baby will choose to do whatever is best for you. I once attended a birth for a mom whose baby was breech, and we tried to get the baby to turn. Naturally, baby didn't want to turn. And so she went for an external cephalic version, which is where we turn the baby to butt down. And then the baby got stuck halfway through the birth and she had a C-section. And I think that ECV is a really great tool, and it's ideal in most cases for baby to be head down because many providers don't know how to assist breech vaginal birth, even though it is a safe and evidence-based choice for most families, and that's a conversation for another time. But I wonder if maybe that baby just knew that coming out that way was the best way for that baby, and then we messed with it, So yeah, I'm not saying that to make anyone feel like ECV is not a good choice, but because it really can be. And I just had a mom in my coaching program have an ECV and then have a vaginal birth. By the way, her baby had a 15.5-inch head around, which is the largest head I've ever heard of in my career. And she didn't have a single tear. So that's amazing. Just wanted to really invite you all to consider, my baby knows what to do. This is something both of us are doing together. It's not just me doing it by myself. We're doing this together. And to choose to trust your baby. Let's now switch into, I want to talk a little bit more about some positioning issues real quick, and then I want to talk about those 5 steps that I talked about before for what you can do to prepare. So when it comes to positioning issues, I can't talk too much about these because I could spend at least an hour kind of going over all of it. But to give you a little overview, sometimes we can do all the right things and still run into an issue. That's rare, but it can happen. And it always comes down to tension. Tension from us holding fear, which creates tension, or tension because we weren't as well prepared physically, or there was a stubborn body tension pattern that we didn't get the personalized support in working through. Sometimes that can happen too. Swollen cervix sometimes can happen when the baby is not putting good pressure on the cervix. So if the baby enters the pelvis and then they're kind of leaning to one side, favoring one side because the other side, the musculature is so tense, then the baby will kind of favor one side and that can cause the cervix to dilate in an uneven way. And that can lead to a longer and more painful labor too. Deep transverse arrest is something that can happen when baby gets really, really deep in the pelvis all the way down to the ischial tuberosities. The ischial tuberosities are those sits bones right here. And basically the length of distance between this space here is more narrow compared compared to any other part in the pelvis. So in navigating down through the pelvis, when baby reaches this more narrow spot, they need as much space as possible, specifically in the middle of the pelvis, which means, do you see, when we open a leg and we lunge, it opens the mid-pelvis. If baby ever gets stuck here, opening the mid-pelvis is how to resolve it. Let's see, a labor stall. So sometimes contractions can just like fizzle out, and it's like, what's happening? Like contractions are just not consistent in their pattern anymore. And baby being asynclitic, which is when the head is tilted to the side. So maybe head extended too is something. I'll say we talked about the baby tucking their chin. Head extended is something that can happen as well. So this is all rare. So I don't want to freak anyone out about it. But actually I want to invite empowerment, because if you know what all these things are, and you know what the signs are, or if someone checks you and they say, oh, I can feel where the baby is, this is a deep transverse arrest, they're stuck at the ischial spines, you'll be like, oh, I know exactly what to do to resolve this. Once I went to a birth, and it was the longest birth, maybe second longest I've ever been to. The first birth I ever attended, I was 14, and that birth was a couple days, maybe 2.5 days. And I'm not sure exactly what was happening there, probably a positioning thing. But as a student midwife, a few years ago, I attended a birth, and it was like 28 hours, something like that, when I got there. So I was there for that long. So she had already been in labor for a little bit before then. So she had her baby. I got there at 7 in the morning, and I was told she was 7 centimeters dilated. This was a home birth. And I was like, okay, we're going to have this baby soon. You know, I like ran over there really fast. And we waited, and baby just wasn't coming. And eventually we checked her and we realized that the baby was asynclitic. So the baby's head was tilted to the side like this. It is very hard for a baby that's asynclitic to come out vaginally, to navigate the bony structure of the pelvis. And the midwife, who is the person that really does everything she can to keep people in the home birth if they're safe, was like, I think we should transfer at one point, because we just couldn't get it to be corrected. And she's going to have to transfer for a C-section for failure to progress, you know, which is rare to be diagnosed with in the midwifery model. And we were like, no, there's a way we can have this baby vaginally. Let's try. Does the mom want to try? And the mom was like, yeah, I want to try. So we decided to do a specific framework for how to get a baby that's asynclitic to back out of the pelvis and then fix the position and go back in. And it involved a lot of inversions. Inversions specifically leaning on the right side because the baby was stuck on the opposite side, if that makes sense. So the baby was like deep in the pelvis. So we had to go upside down a whole bunch in a bunch of different ways to get the baby to back out of the pelvis, correct their position, re-begin labor from up here and go all the way through. So start labor over essentially from all the way back up here. And that's what we did. And it took her a really long time. It was like 26, 28 hours. She had a vaginal birth, and she 100% would have had a C-section if we didn't intervene, if we didn't have that kind of knowledge, I'll say it that way, of the nurse or the midwife or the provider. And hopefully they know how to resolve that kind of issue, because the truth is not every provider does. And we actually had to call spinning babies professional in our community, because me as a doula and student midwife and that midwife of 20 years still were like, we need some extra education around this, because this was a really complicated situation with this mom specifically, because nothing else that normally works would work. And this is why I like to teach this in my coaching program for my moms. I have a framework. So if you're in labor, and if you're in my coaching program, you can text me, and people often text me if there's a thing like that happens. But lately I've been trying to get all my knowledge out into frameworks. So in my coaching program, you can access exactly what you do with pictures. So if someone checks you and they say your cervix is swollen, your baby's head's tilted to the side, you can be like, okay, I know what to do about that, because I learned about it in the coaching program, and I have like a guide that I can pull up, and that's like such a game changer. I can't go too much deeper into that, but I wanted to kind of give you an overview of some things that could happen, why it's important that you learn how to address them in the moment, because it can make the difference between a vaginal birth or a C-section. I've attended dozens of births where the mom would have had a C-section had we not intervened with positioning. So it's so important that you learn about that. Okay, and you can reduce the risk of that even happening at all by doing the right kind of physical preparation in labor. So let's talk about specifically some of those 5 things. The first one is called 3D breathing. This one's really easy and simple. The 3D breathing is basically about supporting the connection between your breath, which creates pressures in your body, and the mobility of the musculature in your pelvis. So I invite everyone to do this right now. Take your hands, put them on your rib cage. If you have a belt, any kind of wrap, a scarf, you can put it around your body like this. And I think this is a great idea to practice, because now I have pressure all around my body so I can feel. And when I expand, I focus on expanding with my breath all the way 360 degrees. So let's just do a few of these. So take a deep breath in. And out. So when you're breathing, I want you to focus on where your hands are or where this is, and think about expanding 360 degrees. So expand with your breath this way, expand with your breath this way, all the way around. And let's just do that a few times. Let's do one more. Amazing. So this is important because rib cage mobility and pelvic mobility go hand in hand. So we have an angle in our rib cage called the infrasternal angle. We also have an angle in our pelvis called the infrapubic angle. And so when we breathe, basically these two angles biologically mirror each other. As pressure and breath come into the body, the infrasternal angle expands, and then the infrapubic angle yields to safely receive that pressure, so it basically opens softly. When you take that breath in, the pelvis slowly opens very gently, like this. When you take the breath out, the pelvis opens this way. So this is supporting the mobility and the access of space, with the pelvis being able to open that inlet and being able to open the outlet as well. So if we have any restrictions in our rib cage, the pressure system kind of goes haywire and the pelvic floor bears the brunt of it, if that makes sense. 3D breathing is a direct line to your nervous system too. So we want to tell your body that you're safe so you can go into labor. And so by breathing fully and expansively, we send a powerful signal to downregulate the nervous system, telling our entire body that we're safe and we're prepared and we're ready. And this downregulation is a critical part of birth and preparing to go into labor. Because you can't take slow, deep breaths if you're in danger. If you're in danger, you're going to breathe more like rapidly. But when you go, like take that full inhale, your body is saying, oh, I'm safe, right? And that's really important part of preparing for birth. And if you're a person who's like trying to go into labor and you're not going into labor, I would do some of this to tell your body, hey, we're safe. And maybe that might help a little bit. So next we're going to talk about the calf stretch. So our calves are deeply and intimately connected to our pelvis through the posterior fascial chain. And that's the connective tissue that runs up the back of the body. So when our calves are tight, they literally pull on this chain and they force our tailbone down into a chronically tucked position. So our tailbone can literally be pulled inward if our calves are really tight. When the tailbone is tucked, it physically closes off the top part of the pelvis, which is the pelvic inlet. And so by actively stretching the calves while maintaining the rib alignment, we keep that tailbone untucked and open, which ensures that the baby has the foundational space that they need to properly engage. So what I recommend you do is take a towel, wrap the towel up. If you don't want to do a towel, you can also, if you want to get fancy with it, you can go online and buy one of those, a foam roller, that's the word. So it's like flat on the bottom, but it has this rounded part. You can stick it there and then you put your foot on it basically and kind of lean forward. The towel usually will do just fine too. If you also have a yoga block or like I have a walk-in shower, so my shower has a little step and I'll put my foot on that. So in your bathroom, get something to stretch your calf, and then you do it when you brush your teeth every morning and night. 1 minute on one side, 1 minute on the other side. Easy. You don't have to like set some time aside to do any kind of stretching or activity. Just do it when you're brushing your teeth. The next one would be heat on the lower back. So this matters because when babies go through the pelvis, they're accommodating the space available to them. And if there is a lot of tension in the musculature around the pelvis, specifically in the back, that will impact the space in the lower back. So it's really common to develop like grippy, tight muscles from the shifting weight of pregnancy, because we sit all the time, we cross our legs, we work in offices often, and so all of that can lead to those grippy, tight muscles. So these grippy muscles hold tension, and that restricts the sacrum, which is the bone at the base of your spine. So getting heat on the low back allows those exhausted and tight muscles to finally melt and relax. And while these muscles release, it allows movement called nutation to occur, meaning the sacrum can gently nod forward and back. So nutation is essential for birth going smoothly. And that means your sacrum can do this. It can move forward and it can move back. But sometimes nutation is restricted because of those tight muscles in the back. Putting heat on your back is something that you can do that can be really helpful, especially at the end of pregnancy in the third trimester. So just apply a pad or a warm compress directly to your low back, focusing on the area just above your tailbone, so pretty low back. You can also just take a warm bath if that works. This kind of heat therapy, especially in the third trimester during prodromal labor, can be helpful, or if you're having these like stop and start contractions to release tension and optimize space. So if anyone finds themselves being like, oh my God, I'm just in this on and off early labor forever, sometimes the heat can really help with that, because we just want to focus on releasing tension to help the baby then to have the space to descend and do what they need to do. Okay, the next one, number 4, is the standing psoas release. I'm going to get up and show you it in a second. So the psoas muscle is your baby's guide wire to the pelvis. It basically like comes up and moves down into the pelvis. And so it gets really tight in our society because this is the muscle that's central to our nervous system's direct connection to the musculoskeletal system. So if we are scared, if we're stressed, which is common in the West, if we're overwhelmed, the psoas anchors us into fight or flee, like a scared dog tucking its tail or someone like opening ready to fight, right? So the psoas is going to respond by creating some kind of constriction. So in modern life, we are not running from actual predators. We are running from anything internal that feels scary or stressful, just like, being a busy mom or like having deadlines at work. That is like really stressful, right? Any kind of stress or fear is going to, the body will respond like it's an actual threat. And so stretching an overworked psoas might feel good for a day, but then the nervous system panics and says, wait, I'm still not safe. And so instead of forcefully stretching, we should use gravity to let the muscle release passively, calming the nervous system and giving the space that they need, the baby needs, to rotate and descend and get into a good position. This is why I had mentioned before that nervous system support is so important when it comes to physical preparation, because the nervous system is directly connected to the body. So you could go to all the yoga classes, all the expensive yoga classes if you want to. But if you're not directly working on your nervous system, and if you don't know how to do that, we're not going to be reaching our full potential. We're not going to be optimizing the space in the pelvis in all the best ways, because the nervous system is still going to create some restriction. So what you can do is get a yoga block or a firm book, something that you feel comfortable standing on. And then I want you to get yourself near like a wall or a chair, and you're just going to swing your leg. So I'll just kind of show you. We basically go to the side. If you can imagine, I put my foot on top of some kind of yoga block or a book, and then take the leg that's hanging. You don't want your hip to be hiked up. You don't want your hip to be sinking like that. Just let it be neutral and just swing it. It's easy. Just do this for a few minutes and then switch and do the other side. Hold on to a wall and just let it swing passively like this. Don't be like, arch, arch. It's not about making the movements big. Basically just letting gravity kind of like help, like you're hanging your leg and just letting it move kind of on its own. And that is the psoas release. The next one is the hip hinge. So let's talk about what that is, and then I'll also get up and I'll show you what that one looks like as well. So the hip hinge is an essential movement practice during pregnancy in preparation for birth. And so when we lean forward in daily life, like we're spitting out toothpaste or we're picking something off the floor, if you have a toddler, you'll understand. I have 2 toddlers, so I'm often like bending and I have to be really careful because I'll easily just like bend and move from my back, but that's really not good for my body. So we tend to keep the pelvis and the legs stuck together as a single block and move entirely from the spine. This is a massive missed opportunity for dynamic pelvic mobility and stability that you could be practicing in your daily life in pregnancy. So when we properly hinge, the hamstrings lengthen. And because the hamstrings insert directly into the sits bones, which are those ischial tuberosities that we talked about right here, finding the length and strength in these muscles opens up a sea of pelvic mobility possibilities. The coolest part about a proper hip hinge is that it forces the hips to do an internal rotation. And internal rotation actively widens the space in the pelvic outlet where the baby is exiting, which is the exact space necessary for an easier pushing phase. So the way to do it is to stand up tall. And what I want you to do is just take your arms flat like this, bend your knees, and then we want to just hinge down with our spine being totally flat, and then come back up. Boom, that was it. It's pretty easy. So you can see I'm not doing this. I'm not bending down like this. Instead, I bend my knees and then my back stays totally flat. And then I come back up. And when I come up, I'm pushing into the ground. I'm activating my thigh muscles. So I'm not coming up using my back, if that makes sense. I'm coming up using my legs to be able to lengthen and stand back up. So similar to the calf stretch, it's like we're just doing this when we're doing a normal thing in daily life. I want you to implement the hip hinge during your daily movements in life. When you lean over to spit out toothpaste, when you are picking up something off the floor, go, okay, I'm just going to bend my knees, keep my back flat, and reach down this way. In addition to that, if you have a daily practice for physical preparation, you can practice on a regular basis, standing up with your back straight and doing what I did and leaning forward and doing like 10 of them every day. I think that's a really great thing that you can do. So in summary, today we talked about my 5 favorite tools for physical preparation. We talked about positioning for the baby, how your pelvis is perfect and your baby knows what to do, how we have a lot of influence, but we don't have control. So what I would love for all of you to take away from this training is that your body is perfect, your baby is perfect, and you were made to give birth. We also live in a culture where we sit a lot. We aren't used to like squatting all day, walking up and down hills. We sit a lot, we cross our legs, and that naturally will just create tension in the musculature around the pelvis. So one of the best things you can do to prepare to support a really smooth birth, to decrease your risk for a C-section from a long labor from baby getting a little stuck, is to learn how to prepare physically by doing some of these things. Also, I recommend learning what to do if a positioning issue were to arise in labor. If you're in my coaching program, you'll learn exactly that, plus exactly what to do in each trimester of pregnancy to support you in getting that optimized space in your pelvis, but in a way that's personalized to you. Because if you're still having nervous system challenges, if you have constant pain or tension on the right side, it means that there's something deeper that an online video or live training isn't going to teach you, and that personalized support might actually be the right choice for you.